Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1551, Black Veil. Han Li smiled as he stowed away his flying swords and black mountain. He then rustled a sleeve, and a ball of golden light shot forth before transforming into a small leopard-like beast that landed on the ground several feet in front of him. It was none other than his leopard Kirin beast. The fire young beings faltered initially upon seeing this beast, but all of them drew sharp breaths after sweeping their spiritual sense toward it. The immensely powerful aura emanating from the body of this little beast sent chills running down even the high priestess' spine. Go and kill all of the black Rakshasa beings, Han Li instructed in a concise manner. A ferocious light appeared in the leopard Kirin beast's eyes upon hearing this, and its body swayed as it manifested 7 or 8 identical projections, all of which rushed out of the palace at once. The beastly projections merely blurred before reappearing several hundred feet away, and after just another, they'd completely disappeared out of sight. The speed at which they were moving was truly astonishing. The woman only managed to barely recompose her expression after a short while, but the shock in her heart still lingered. A thought then immediately occurred to her, and she suddenly produced a badge before rapidly pointing at it a few times while chanting something. Spiritual light immediately flashed from the badge, and the 5-colored light barrier outside the palace instantly vanished. Seeing as everything has been taken care of here, I'll be going back to rest now. Don't worry about that spirit beast. It'll come back to me after all of the enemies have been destroyed, Han Li said in a calm manner. Before the fire young beings could express their gratitude toward him again, azure light flashed from his body, and they flew out of the palace as a streak of azure light, disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. The fire young beings were left to their own devices with awestruck expression in their eyes. After a long while, one of the white-robed serpentine beings heaved a sigh of relief, and said, "Thank heavens you convinced this Mr. Han to stay, High Priestess. Otherwise, our entire race would have most likely been eradicated." Indeed. We were all quite perplexed by High Priestess' decision to give the divine pill away to an outsider, but I can see now that we've been far too short-sighted, another white-robed priest chimed in with a nod. However, a wry smile appeared on the woman's face upon hearing these words of praise. You two think far too highly of me. I only gave the divine pill away as there was no other alternative, and thankfully, my final roll of the dice resulted in a favorable outcome. We were blessed by the heavens to have discovered someone as powerful as Mr. Han. Zhua, how do you think Mr. Han compares with your master? The woman turned to her daughter with a serious look on her face. Bai Zhua's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and only after a brief pause did she hesitantly reply, "My master is a 5th-tier upper race being, but even if she were here in person, it'd still most likely be a lot more difficult for her to slay those 2 black Rakshasa monarchs." The young woman's reply was rather ambiguous, but the implications behind her words were quite apparent, and the woman nodded in response. However, peculiar expressions appeared on the faces of the white-robed priests upon hearing this, and one of them murmured, "Could it be that Mr. Han is a powerful upper race being? In that case, even the most powerful being in the nearby region, Layman Silver Shark, wouldn't be a match for him." That may not necessarily be the case. Layman Silver Shark is an upper 3rd-tier being, and cultivation arts, as well as treasures, are extremely important in deciding the outcome of battles, so it would be unfair for us to make such comparisons, the woman replied. All of the white-robed serpentine beings nodded with contemplative expressions upon hearing this, and they all fell silent. After a while, someone finally broke the silence. How long does Mr. Han plan to stay on Firecloud Island? Does he have any intention of permanently settling here? The woman could sense what the priest was trying to ask, and she immediately shook her head before replying, "I'm not sure, but he most likely won't leave right away. Having said that, it's also very unlikely that he would choose to stay on our island permanently. Someone of Senior Han's powers surely wouldn't be willing to confine themselves to a small island like ours." The other white-robed serpentine beings furrowed their brows upon hearing this, and the entire palace fell silent again. "All right, we'll discuss these matters another time. The battle outside hasn't reached a conclusion yet. Even though the 2 Black Rakshasa monarchs have been slain, there could still be other high-grade Black Rakshasa beings out there. Mr. Han's spirit beast is indeed quite powerful, but we can't just let it do all the work for us, so let's join the battle outside as well. The sooner we can get rid of all of these Black Rakshasa beings, the fewer casualties our race would incur, the woman suddenly instructed. All of the white-robed serpentine beings immediately bowed and nodded in agreement upon hearing this. Thus, the 6 of them flew out of the palace and rushed toward the locations where the battle was most intense. A short while later, Han Li returned to his wooden cabin and reactivated the restriction before taking a seat on the wooden bed in a cross-legged manner. A contemplative look then appeared on his face. The 2 most powerful Black Rakshasa monarchs had already been slain, so the leopard Kirin beast would be more than enough to take care of the rest of the battle. As such, he'd already returned the favor for the pill that the woman had bestowed upon him. All he had to do now was rest and recover for around half a year, and he should be back to his peak condition. With that in mind, a faint smile appeared on Han Li's face. However, a thought then suddenly occurred to him, and he abruptly flipped a hand over. Black light flashed, and a thin veil appeared over his hand. This was none other than one of the treasures he'd taken from the remains of the Black Rakshasa monarchs. Han Li stared at the veil in his hand, and an intrigued look appeared on his face. This was a thin black veil that was quite smooth and soft to the touch, and also gave off a rather cool sensation. Just by adjusting the orientation of the veil under the light, Han Li could see faint black runes on its surface, clearly indicating that it was no ordinary treasure. After inspecting the veil for a while, Han Li extended a finger toward it, and azure light flashed from his fingertip as he injected a vast amount of pure spiritual power into the treasure. He then flicked his wrist, and the black veil rose up into the air before transforming into a piece of semi-transparent material that was around 10 feet in size. Han Li inspected the item through narrowed eyes, then cast an incantation seal toward it. The incantation seal disappeared into the black veil in a flash, following which it descended toward Han Li and completely obscured his body. An astonishing scene then ensued. In the instant that the veil landed on Han Li's body, he suddenly became quite blurry and indistinct, and he completely disappeared after a few flashes. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face as he inspected his hands, then glanced at his concealed body. Immediately thereafter, blue light suddenly flashed within his eyes, and it was only growing brighter and brighter. Moments later, a faint smile appeared on his face. As expected, he was unable to see through this veil's concealment ability unless he activated his spirit eye ability to its very maximal extent. Those 2 Black Rakshasa beings had presumably used these treasures to sneak their way into the palace. With that in mind, Han Li released a wisp of spiritual sense and attempted to pierce through the veil with it. However, as soon as his spiritual sense made contact with the black veil, he felt as if it had fallen into a vast expanse of illusionary mist, making it completely impossible for it to pass through the veil. It appeared that this treasure was responsible for his inability to identify the cultivation bases of the 2 Black Rakshasa monarchs. After a brief moment of contemplation, he suddenly grabbed onto a corner of the black veil before casting an incantation seal. Black light flashed from the veil, and it abruptly disappeared into his robes. Han Li then used his spiritual sense to assess his own body several times, following which a pleased look appeared on his face. This black veil was indeed quite a brilliant treasure as it had exemplary concealment abilities. In fact, it was second only to the High Zenith Invisibility Talisman among the concealment treasures that he possessed. The High Zenith Invisibility Talisman did indeed possess extraordinary concealment abilities, but it also had many limitations. Not only did it severely hamper his speed, the treasures and cultivation arts he could use with the talisman activated were also significantly restricted. In contrast, the black veil was slightly inferior in terms of concealment ability, but it had none of the aforementioned drawbacks. Furthermore, its concealment ability would become more potent the more powerful its user was. If it weren't for the fact that the 2 Black Rakshasa monarchs possessed cultivation bases that were far inferior to his, he wouldn't have been able to see through them so easily. Han Li experimented with the black veil for a while longer before stowing it away. After that, Han Li closed his eyes and began to engage in silent cultivation. Golden light flashed from his body, and golden halos proliferated above his head as the seated golden projection appeared once again. Han Li remained completely still, and several days passed by in a flash. During this time, the woman had brought a batch of rare spirit medicines and high-grade spirit stones to his doorstep in person. On that occasion, Han Li hadn't opened the door to greet her. Instead, he merely asked her to place the medicines and spirit stones outside the door, clearly indicating that he had no intention of entertaining any guests during the upcoming period of time. The woman naturally didn't dare to express any displeasure toward this, and she immediately set the items down outside the wooden cabin before taking her leave. Only then did Han Li get the weeping soul beast to carry the items into the room. Throughout this process, he didn't leave his bed nor open his eyes even once. One day passed by after another, and several months flew by in a flash. During this time, none of the higher-ups of the Fire Yang race dared to disturb Han Li again. On this day, Han Li suddenly opened his eyes, then opened his mouth to expel a ball of silver flames. The silver flames immediately transformed into a fist-sized silver fire raven. It was none other than the spirit-engulfing fire raven. Han Li looked at the fire raven, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. At first glance, the bird's appearance didn't appear to have changed at all, but after sweeping his spiritual sense toward it, he discovered that something seemed to have appeared within its body. Blue light flashed through his eyes, and he was finally able to identify what this thing was. Within the silver flames, a series of barely visible golden threads had appeared. These golden threads had only appeared after the spirit-engulfing heavenly flames had completely refined the so-called revolving evil spirit light, so there was most likely a direct correlation between the two. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li made a hand seal before pointing a finger at the silver fire raven in front of him. The fire raven immediately spread its wings before flying in circles in the air above Han Li. Immediately thereafter, the fire raven opened its mouth to blast forth a thin golden and silver thread. The thread struck the restriction that Han Li had set up in a flash, and the white light barrier tremored slightly before the thin thread was able to pass through it without any impediment. Chapter 1552 – Spatial Cloud Crystal. Following another flash, the thin thread re-entered through the light barrier, encountering no obstruction whatsoever yet again. The fire raven then blasted the thin thread out of its mouth again, aiming it at a wooden chair in the room on this occasion. The scenes that unfolded next immediately sent a stir running through Han Li's heart. After the thin thread flashed past the wooden chair, the latter immediately turned into a pitch-black color before being corroded into nothingness. This golden and silver thread really was extraordinarily toxic. Han Li exhaled as he made a hand seal, and the silver fire raven flew toward him before disappearing into his body in a flash. Han Li then closed his eyes and entered a meditative state. However, in the next instant, he suddenly opened his eyes again as his brows furrowed slightly. Right at this moment, a voice sounded from outside. Junior Xianxia is here to pay her respects to Mr. Han. May I have the honor of requesting an audience with you, Mr. Han? This was an unfamiliar female voice that carried with it an irresistible air. Xianxia. Han Li was rather perplexed. He was sure that this was definitely the first time he'd heard such a name. With that in mind, Han Li released his spiritual sense, and it passed through the white light barrier, thereby allowing him to glean the scenes outside the wooden cabin. There, he discovered a woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s in an azure palatial dress. She was extremely beautiful, and there was an indescribable air of regal grace about her. Han Li swept her spiritual sense toward her to find that this young woman possessed a mid-deity transformation stage cultivation. After a brief pause, he slowly asked, "Who are you? You're not a Fire Yang being from Firecloud Island, are you? How do you know that I'm staying here?" "I'm the master of Baizhua of the Fire Yang race. I heard that the Fire Yang race was in grave danger, so I came here to offer them my assistance, but I heard that you had already saved the entire race. My disciple told me that you're immensely powerful and could be a senior of the upper 3 tiers of upper race, so I decided to pay you a visit in the hopes that I could perhaps learn something," the woman said with an earnest smile on her face. "You're that little girl's master? All right, I wanted to come out of seclusion in the next few days anyway, and I also have some questions for you. Seeing as you've paid me a visit, it looks like I have no choice but to meet you," Han Li chuckled. Before Xianxia had a chance to reply again, the white light barrier around the wooden cabin suddenly dissipated, immediately following which the wooden door opened of its own accord. The woman hesitated briefly before calmly making her way into the cabin. After entering the cabin and catching sight of Han Li, a hint of surprise flashed through the woman's eyes. It was quite clear that Han Li's youthful appearance came as quite a surprise to her. However, a respectful look immediately appeared on her face after she swept her spiritual sense toward Han Li, and she extended a curtsy as she said, "You really are a being of the upper 3 tiers of the upper race. It appears I was right to come here. Your cultivation base is nothing to be scoffed at, either, fellow Daoist. Take a seat," Han Li said in a calm manner as he inspected the woman with a faint hint of blue light flashing through his eyes. Xianxia expressed her gratitude before taking a seat on a wooden chair beside the bed. "You're using wind attribute cultivation arts, right?" Han Li suddenly asked. His question immediately brought a hint of surprise to the woman's face. "How did you know, senior? Could it be that we've met before?" Xianxia asked. "That's not the case. It's just that your movements are quite light and graceful, and the aura of the treasures you're carrying are all of the wind attribute, so I deduced that you were perhaps a wind attribute cultivator," Han Li explained in a calm manner. Han Li's reply was quite nonchalant, but the woman was quite stunned. It wasn't difficult to identify a person's cultivation base at a glance, but it was quite extraordinary that he was able to even identify the attributes of the treasures hidden within her body. As these thoughts raced through her mind, the expression on Xiao's face became even more respectful as she carefully said, "Your wisdom is truly unmatched, senior. I am indeed mainly using wind attribute cultivation arts. I heard from Zhua that you're a sword cultivator, and that you're not from our Flame Coral Islands, senior. May I ask if you're from the Thunder Continent or perhaps elsewhere in this nearby region?" Han Li smiled upon hearing this, and he replied, "I'm neither from the Thunder Continent nor from anywhere nearby." Xiao's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but a thought then suddenly occurred to her as she exclaimed, "Does that mean you're from another continent, senior?" "You really are a smart person, Fairy Qing," Han Li replied with a smile. Xiao's heart jolted with shock upon hearing Han Li's admission. Only after a long while did the shock on her face fade, and she exhaled as she said, "The fact that you were able to get here from another continent is a testament to your abilities, senior. It's no wonder that you were able to kill those 2 Black Rakshasa monarchs so easily. However, most seniors from other continents traveling to our Thunder Continent wouldn't pass through our Flame Coral Islands, so you're the first cultivator from another continent to have graced this region in the past 10,000 years. When you put it that way, I feel quite honored. However, I must clarify something. I never intended to come here, and I only ended up in this place as a result of an accident," Han Li replied with a wry smile. "Regardless of how you got here, it's undeniable that you possess extraordinary powers, senior. I've encountered a few issues with my cultivation recently. Would you be able to enlighten me, senior?" Xiao asked with a smile. "I wouldn't dare to claim that I can provide you with enlightenment, but we certainly exchange our knowledge with one another," Han Li replied with a calm nod. Xiao was ecstatic to hear this, and she immediately expressed her gratitude. She was naturally aware that even though Han Li was speaking about this as if it were a fair exchange, she was the one that would be benefiting far more from this due to the vast disparity between their cultivation bases. Thus, the woman began to make cultivation-related inquiries to Han Li. Even though the cultivation arts they were using differed quite drastically, there were common issues that the vast majority of cultivators encountered at certain points in their cultivation. Han Li made no effort to hide anything, either. After carefully listening to the issues she raised, he really did give her some useful instructions. Even though he didn't say much, he was still a spatial tempering cultivator, so his guidance was undoubtedly vastly beneficial to Xiao. As such, she was ecstatic as she listened with rapt focus, and her eyes were bright with excitement. Of course, the woman also revealed some of her cultivation secrets during this process, and some of those aspects were also somewhat helpful to Han Li as well. Thus, the two of them conversed with each other for half a day. After Han Li answered the woman's final questions, she closed her eyes and silently processed his response for a long while before suddenly opening her eyes. She then rose to her feet and extended a grateful bow toward Han Li as she said, "Thank you for your guidance, senior. Your teachings have saved me at least several decades of arduous cultivation." "It wasn't much, I was merely answering your questions. Besides, I have some things that I'd like to ask you as well, so it'll be an exchange of sorts, Han Li replied in a calm manner. Please ask me any questions you may have, and I'll be sure to answer them to the best of my ability, Senior, Xianxia declared without any hesitation. I don't have any particularly complex questions. I just wanted to ask you if there were any long-distance teleportation formations nearby that could teleport me to another continent, Han Li said in a serious voice. Teleportation formations? Are you trying to get back to your own continent, Senior? Xianxia immediately guessed Han Li's intentions. Indeed. I'm almost fully healed from my injuries, and I don't intend to stay here for much longer. According to my experience, long-distance teleportation formations should exist in all places inhabited by large numbers of cultivators, Han Li replied with a nod. A wry smile appeared on Xianxia's face upon hearing this. That is indeed true, Senior, but I'm going to have to disappoint you. What? There are no teleportation formations here. Han Li's heart sank a little upon hearing this. If you'd come here several thousand years ago, then there would still be a teleportation formation on Flame Coral Islands that led straight to the Thunder Continent. However, this formation was destroyed by a massive beast from another region of the sea thousands of years ago, and the high-grade cultivators guarding the formation have also all been devoured by this beast. Unless you're confident in your abilities to fly to the Thunder Continent, I'm afraid this region of the sea is virtually inescapable, Senior Han. I presume that's also why the Black Rakshasa race were able to reveal themselves in such a reckless manner and suddenly attack the Naga race, Xianxia sighed. Han Li was silent for a long while before a grim expression appeared on his face, and he asked, Is there no way to repair the teleportation formation? If we had sufficient materials, it would certainly be possible to repair the formation, Xianxia replied. Oh. From the sounds of it, the main caveat here is the inability to gather sufficient materials. Han Li asked as he raised an eyebrow. He was carrying many types of rare materials, so he was starting to grow hopeful again. We've gathered most of the materials required, but the main core that ensures the function of the teleportation formation is a chunk of spatial cloud crystal, and that material is extremely rare. There are only a few mines that produce such a material on our Thunder Continent, and it's impossible to find it here, the woman explained. Spatial cloud crystal. Han Li's brows immediately furrowed upon hearing this. It was his first time hearing such a name. However, that was not all that surprising. After all, teleportation formations were extremely profound, and each continent most likely had a different method of constructing them, thereby necessitating the use of different materials. Just as Han Li's expression was gradually darkening even further, Xianxia suddenly said something that instilled him with renewed hope. Chapter 1553, Blue Lake Island. What? You're saying that spatial cloud crystal was devoured by that giant beast, and that the beast is roaming the nearby area? Han Li was rather incredulous. Indeed. At the time, the giant beast devoured most of the entire teleportation formation, including the spatial cloud crystal, and it left this region of the sea immediately thereafter. However, someone discovered this beast again over 100 years ago in the deep sea to the south. On that occasion, it was discovered by a dozen or so upper race beings, but only 2 of them managed to escape while the others all died. During the next several decades after that, we arranged many hunting parties to try and kill this beast in order to repair our teleportation formation. But not only was this beast extremely powerful, it possessed brains and brawn in equal measure. When there were too many people around, it would hide deep within the sea and refuse to show itself, and it would only attack stragglers or small hunting parties. As such, many cultivators perished during our attempts to slay the beast, all to no avail, Xianxia sighed in a resigned manner. What kind of abilities does this beast possess to make it such a difficult opponent? Han Li asked with a peculiar look on his face. Generally speaking, regardless of how powerful a sea beast was, it would inevitably be slain if it were to be hunted down by a group of cultivators. We haven't been able to identify what species this beast is, but it seems to be a mutated sea beast. From a distance, it appears to be a massive whale, but it can expand or shrink as it pleases, and it's capable of unleashing a water movement technique that allows it to move extremely quickly in the sea. Even on the few occasions where we managed to force the beast into a dire situation, It was able to easily escape after unleashing that technique, thereby making all of our prior efforts go to waste. On top of that, the sea beast is extremely violent and ferocious. Aside from Lehman Silver Shark, who's the most powerful cultivator in this region of the sea, no one dares to face the beast on their own, the young woman said with furrowed brows. The elation on Han Li's face also faded upon hearing this. It appeared that things were not going to be as easy as he imagined. However, a skeptical look then appeared on his face as he asked, "Will the spatial cloud crystal still remain in the sea beast's body after so many years? Wouldn't it have been refined or absorbed already?" Rest assured, Xianxia, the spatial cloud crystal possesses spatial attribute powers, so there's no way to destroy it unless an attack imbued with spatial powers is used. That sea beast possesses a diverse range of powers and abilities, but it doesn't possess spatial attribute powers. That's something that we've managed to ascertain after hunting it for so many years, Xianxia replied in a confident manner. Han Li nodded in response before falling into deep thought. Fellow Daoist Qing, do you know the rough location that this sea beast tends to appear in? Han Li asked. Do you intend to kill this beast, Senior Han? The woman asked as a grave look appeared on her face. Indeed. It wouldn't be plausible for me to fly to the Thunder Continent. Even if I fly without any rest, it'll take me the better part of a year, and unless I become significantly more powerful than I am now, I'll most likely perish along the journey considering all of the hazards that are present deep within the ocean. However, if I want to return to the continent that I was originally from, then I have no choice but to visit the Thunder Continent, which is the continent closest to us. Only there will I be able to find teleportation formations capable of teleporting people between continents, Han Li mused as he stroked his chin. It would indeed be vastly beneficial to everyone in this region if we could repair the teleportation formation. This region of the sea has a few decent spirit veins, but cultivation resources are sorely lacking, and many people have reached bottlenecks, only to find themselves unable to progress any further. After a few more millennia, all of the cultivation resources in this area would most likely be completely exhausted. If you intend to hunt down this beast, then how about you join forces with us, Xianxia? The woman offered with a smile. She then paused momentarily before continuing. Truth be told, I left my cave abode on this occasion to visit Lehman Silver Shark on his island as he was trying to organize another hunting party to kill that sea beast. I've actually come here to visit you with the intention of inviting you to come along with us, Xianxia. If you can repair the teleportation formation, then of course I wouldn't mind working with all of you, Han Li replied with a smile. Rest assured, Xianxia, we have all of the other materials ready, as well as capable formation masters who are able to repair the formation. All that we're missing is the spatial cloud crystal, Xianxia said with an elated expression. That's good to hear. Han Li nodded in response. With your assistance, there's a good chance that we'll be able to succeed this time. Lehman Silver Shark has asked everyone to gather on Blue Lake Island located to the south in 4 months, and the hunting party will set off from there to search for that sea beast. If you truly intend to join us, then you'll just have to turn up on the designated date with this silver shark badge. Xianxia flipped a hand over to produce a shimmering silver badge as she spoke. Han Li accepted the badge from her before giving it a quick inspection. The badge was of a gleaming silver hue, as if it had been forged from pure silver, and there was a large shark character emblazoned onto its surface. Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he stowed the badge away. Xianxia was overjoyed to see Han Li agree to join their hunting party so quickly, and she chatted with Han Li for a while longer before finally taking her leave after extending a respectful bow. After she flew away as a streak of white light, the white light barrier appeared around the wooden cabin once again, and at the same time, the wooden doors slowly swung shut. Over 2 months later, a long cry and incessant cry erupted from the foot of the small mountain, piercing straight into the heavens. Almost all of the fire young beings on the island heard this cry, and all of them turned toward that direction with bewilderment etched on their faces. The high priestess was discussing some things within the palace with some high-grade serpentine beings, and she immediately emerged from the palace upon hearing this sound. She stood on the plaza and cast her gaze toward the small mountain with a peculiar look on her face. Moments later, the long cry drew to an abrupt conclusion, following which a streak of azure light shot forth from the foot of the mountain. The streak of light reached an extremely high altitude in a flash, then flew toward the edge of the island. Not long after that, The silver streak of light appeared over the surface of the ocean several hundred kilometers away from Firecloud Island, heading toward the southern direction without any pause or delay. Han Li flew within the streak of light in a completely expressionless manner while contemplating what he was about to do next. If he could join forces with the hunting party and slay the sea beast, then that would naturally be the ideal outcome. After recovering the spatial cloud crystal, he'd be able to head to the Thunder Continent, then return to the Qianyuan continent from there. If they failed to kill the beast, then he'd have to wait in this area for further opportunities to arise or to hunt down the sea beast again in the future. In any case, he was carrying a large quantity of spirit medicines, as well as that small vial, and they would be sufficient to support his cultivation for a long time. Having said that, though, it had been a long time since Han Li had left the territory of the human race, and he was wondering what state the human race was currently in. Had a battle with other foreign races broken out? Was Deep Heaven City still standing? He hadn't stayed in that city for long, but he certainly didn't want to see the human race being wiped out. In reality, the main reason why he wanted to return to the territory of the human race was because he was worried that Nangong Wan might ascend to the spirit realm soon. According to his estimations, it would take quite a bit more time before Nangong Wan could ascend to the spirit realm through a spatial node, but he obviously couldn't reliably foresee the future. Perhaps Nangong Wan could have encountered some kind of miraculous opportunity that had taken her to the deity transformation stage, and maybe she'd already ascended to the spirit realm. With his current cultivation base and abilities, he was powerful enough to protect Nangong Wan on his own in the human territories. Even for one as calm and steadfast as Han Li, he couldn't help but be struck by a sentimental feeling at the thought of his beloved wife. However, it only took him mere moments to cast aside that train of thought and refocus on the task at hand. Much to Han Li's surprise, this journey was quite a smooth one. He slew a few insolent demonic birds that dared to attack him along the way, but he didn't even encounter so much as a single sea beast. Thus, over a month later, he finally arrived in an unfamiliar region of the sea. As he sped through the air, his spiritual sense scoured the area down below. According to the map that he was consulting, he should have been close to the so-called Blue Lake Island. However, there were no islands to be seen in the nearby area. Han Li felt this to be rather strange, but his expression suddenly changed slightly after he flew ahead for several tens of kilometers further, and he abruptly changed directions while accelerating at the same time. Thus, he soon flew into a strange region of the sea. The weather there shifted in the blink of an eye, and it began to snow over the ocean. Countless white snowflakes were swept up by the gusts of frosty winds, striking one with a bone-chilling sensation. What was even more peculiar was that the ocean down below didn't show any signs of freezing despite the frosty weather. Instead, there seemed to be bursts of hot steam rising up from the surface of the ocean. The hot and cold air combined and intertwined in a peculiar phenomenon, creating a vast expanse of mist over the ocean. After flying for a while through the wind and snow, Han Li suddenly made a grabbing motion downward to draw a stream of seawater into his grasp, only to find that it was extremely hot. Han Li raised an eyebrow as he looked on at the mist in the distance, which was only growing denser as time passed, but he merely continued onward without any pause. As Han Li forged ahead, the wind and snow in the air above became even more frosty, but the sea was bubbling and churning as if it had reached a boiling point. However, Han Li merely ignored these peculiar scenes and continued to fly onward. After traveling for several tens of kilometers, the mist suddenly disappeared up ahead, and Han Li was greeted by the sight of a translucent island of ice. The snowstorm had already ceased here, but the air temperature only plummeted even further. The seawater here had also frozen to form a thin layer of ice, creating a stark contrast with the boiling seawater that Han Li had just witnessed not long ago. Han Li didn't take much time to ponder the issue before flying directly toward the icy island. From a distance, he could tell that this was quite a large island, one that was several times larger than Firecloud Island. This island was most likely the Blue Lake Island that had been annotated on the map. With Han Li's current speed, he was naturally able to reach the edge of the island in the blink of an eye. However, before he'd flown onto the island, a thunderous roar suddenly erupted up ahead from deep within the island. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon hearing this menacing roar, and all of the blood within his body began to churn violently. Chapter 1554. Monstrous Moth. A bewildered look appeared on Han Li's face as he drew to an abrupt halt. He then immediately made a hand seal, and golden light flashed from his body as he activated his Provenance True Devil Arts. Through doing so, he was able to forcibly repress his churning blood, but before his bodily condition had completely returned to normal, the skin on his back was suddenly struck by a scorching sensation, as if it were being directly baked over an open flame. Han Li's brows furrowed, and he immediately took off the upper half of his robes to reveal his upper body. He then raised a hand, and a ball of golden light shot forth before transforming into a shimmering golden mirror. The mirror revolved in the air before appearing above Han Li, and spiritual light flashed from its surface as it instantly revealed to Han Li the scenes currently unfolding on his back. From the image in the mirror, Han Li discovered that 4 extremely clear and vivid tattoo-like images had appeared on his back. There was a vibrant rainbow phoenix, a massive azure bird, a 5-claws golden dragon, and a 5-colored peacock. These were none other than the manifestations of the 4 true spirit bloods that Han Li had absorbed into his own body. At this moment, not only were these 4 images shimmering with spiritual light, they were moving around incessantly as if they'd sprung to life. If it weren't for the fact that the power of his Provenance True Devil Arts was repressing them, it appeared that the 4 true spirit bloods were preparing to fly out of his body. Han Li was naturally quite astonished to see this. He had already used the 12 awakening transformations to completely refine the 4 true spirit bloods, so how was this happening? Furthermore, all of this had been caused by nothing more than that thunderous roar. Han Li's mind was racing rapidly, yet before he had a chance to figure anything out, another resounding roar erupted in the distance. Brilliant light erupted from the true spirit images on his back, and they began to thrash around even more violently, as if they were attempting to find some avenue through which they could leave his body. Han Li harumphed coldly as he made a hand seal, and golden light radiated from his body, following which the true spirit images immediately ceased moving. Han Li took a deep breath before waving a hand through the air, and the small golden mirror exploded with a dull thump, then dissipated into specks of golden light. Meanwhile, Han Li transformed into a streak of azure light and flew deeper into Ice Island, heading directly toward the direction where the thunderous roars had erupted from. These unsettling roars were able to disrupt the true spirit bloods that he'd already refined in his body, so he certainly couldn't leave this mystery unresolved. His decision to venture further into the island was also contributed to by the fact that he'd become vastly more powerful, to the extent that virtually no beings below the body integration stage could pose a substantial threat to him. Back when he was still at the deity transformation stage, he would have most likely been a lot more hesitant. After just a few flashes, the streak of azure light disappeared into the distance. The roars didn't seem to have come from very far away, but even after traveling for over 20 kilometers, Han Li still hadn't reached the source of the commotion. Furthermore, this ice island itself was also rather strange. It seemed to have been enshrouded under some kind of natural magnetic field that significantly hampered one's spiritual sense, thereby limiting his detection radius to less than 10 kilometers. However, after flying onward for a short while longer, Han Li's expression suddenly changed slightly as he drew to an abrupt halt. Moments later, spiritual light flashed in the sky up ahead, and 7 or 8 streaks of light of different colors came hurtling toward him. Han Li narrowed his eyes to try and get a better view of what was coming toward him, and the sight that he was greeted by sent a jolt running through his heart. The streaks of light flying in his direction consisted of a group of cultivators, all of whom were at around the nascent soul stage. All of them wore extremely horrified expressions as they flew as quickly as they could, indicating that seemed to be something extremely fearsome hunting them down. Han Li cast his gaze into the distance behind this group of fleeing cultivators, only to find nothing there. His brows furrowed, and he was just about to call out to these people when a thunderous roar erupted in the distance. One roar after another then rang out in a relentless sequence, and an astonishing turn of events unfolded. As the roars rang out in quick succession, the spiritual light around the bodies of the nascent soul cultivators flickered unsteadily, and their skins suddenly took on a vibrant red color. Immediately thereafter, several blood-curdling cries sounded as these cultivators' physical bodies and souls all exploded into clouds of blood mist in unison, then dissipated into nothingness. A grim look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. Right at this moment, spiritual light flashed once again up ahead, and 2 more streaks of light came hurtling toward him. Han Li focused his gaze on those two streaks of light, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. Within one of those streaks of light was a woman in a palatial dress. It was none other than Xianxia. Her companion was a young woman in a black dress who was not inferior to her in the looks department. However, both of them also wore horrified expressions, and their skin had also become quite flushed amid the string of resounding roars. Fortunately for them, they were able to maintain the layers of spiritual light around their bodies, and they managed to stave off the fate of self-detonation that befell those who had come before them. This was clearly because both of these women were mid-deity transformation cultivators, and their superior cultivation bases compared to the others was the key for their survival. Even so, both of them had clearly been severely debilitated and were flying significantly slower than they would otherwise have been capable of. Han Li raised an eyebrow, and he was just about to fly over to them when his expression abruptly changed while his pupils contracted drastically. A murky grey shadow that was several thousand feet in size had appeared several kilometers behind the two women, and it was flying directly toward them. The string of thunderous roars was coming from none other than that gargantuan creature, and even though Han Li had activated his Provenance True Devil Arts, he could still feel the 4 true spirit bloods struggling to free themselves from his body. Even a cultivator of Han Li's powers was being adversely affected by these fearsome roars, so it was quite clear that the two women would be suffering to an even greater degree, seeing as they possessed far inferior cultivation bases compared to Han Li and were also a lot closer to the grey shadow in the distance. As the giant creature began to close in, the two women decelerated even further, and it was as if they were flying through an invisible restriction that was exerting an immense resistant force. As such, the massive grey shadow was able to quickly close the gap between itself and its prey, and the two women could only turn around to unleash a series of attacks. A large bow abruptly appeared in Xiao's hands, and a bow and arrow was shot forth. The arrow then split into countless arrows mid-flight, conjuring up a rain of arrows that fell like a torrential downpour. Meanwhile, her companion raised a hand, and several streaks of white light surged through the air, all of which transformed into white lightning WMs that hurtled toward the grey shadow. The attacks unleashed by the two women rapidly approached the grey shadow, but before they could draw close to its massive body, a burst of invisible fluctuations suddenly swept forth, causing all of the arrows and lightning WMs to self-detonate on the spot. The grey shadow took advantage of this opportunity close in on the two women again, and after just a few flashes, it was only around half a kilometer away from them. Both women immediately turned deathly pale. With their cultivation bases, if that grey shadow were to draw any closer, they would also suffer the fate of self-detonation in the face of its devastating roars. In her panic, Xiao finally caught sight of Han Li, and she immediately yelled, "Mr. Han, save us!" Xiao was appraising Han Li as if she'd just found her savior, and her female companion faltered slightly upon seeing her expression. She then also hurriedly cast a glance at Han Li, just in time to witness a burst of piercing blue light flashing through his eyes. Han Li had activated his Spirit Eye ability, and he was staring intently at the grey shadow in the distance with a grave expression on his face. Through the use of his Spirit Eye ability, he was able to identify the massive creature as a flying moth-like monster. The creature's wingspan stretched for over 1,000 feet, and it had 2 heads, one on the top of its body while the other was situated on the underside of its body. Its upper head was similar to that of a furry lion with a pair of green eyes, and that head was the one responsible for letting loose those thunderous roars. Meanwhile, its lower head belonged to that of a giant python, and the eyes on that head were tightly shut, but it was flicking its forked serpentine tongue in an erratic manner. What is this thing? I've never heard of anything like it. Even with Han Li's vast wealth of knowledge and experience, he still couldn't help but draw a sharp breath at the sight of this fearsome beast. Thankfully, the demonic power emanating from the beast's body wasn't overly powerful, and it appeared to be a late spatial tempering stage being. As soon as Xiao's plea for help rang out, Han Li swept both sleeves through the air, and 72 small azure swords immediately shot forth. The swords then transformed into 72 azure threads that flew through the air toward the giant moth. Xiao was the one who had invited him here, and they'd conversed with one another extensively on a past occasion, so he naturally wasn't going to abandon her in such a dire situation. Han Li's newly refined flying swords were drastically faster than they once were, and they reached the giant grey moth in a flash before piercing toward its body like lightning. The massive moth clearly didn't expect Han Li's attacks to reach it so quickly, and it didn't have time to adopt any defensive measures before the azure threads punctured its body with ease. The grey shadow immediately faltered, and the unsettling roars also came to an abrupt halt. Immediately thereafter, the azure threads revolved around the giant moth's body, quickly slicing it into countless pieces. However, Han Li was not elated in the slightest by his easy victory. Instead, his eyes narrowed as a wary look appeared on his face. Having just been saved from certain death, Xianxia and the woman in black were ecstatic. The massive moth's roars had just cut off, thereby freeing them from its restrictive power, and they immediately took this opportunity to fly toward Han Li with all their might. At the same time, Xianxia yelled out from afar, "Be careful, Senior Han, this thing seems to possess an immortal body that can't be killed by normal treasures." An immortal body. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this. Right at this moment, the countless sections of the giant moth's body suddenly converged, and grey light flashed as it instantly regenerated back to its original form. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and all of his flying swords transformed into azure threads again at his behest, then hurtled toward the giant moth. However, the massive creature let loose a thunderous roar of fury, and at the same time, it flapped its wings to emit those invisible fluctuations again. The ripples proliferated in all directions, instantly sweeping up all of the oncoming azure threads. The azure threads shuddered in unison before reverting back to their sword form, then exploding into balls of azure light in quick succession. Chapter 1555. Intense Battle. Han Li didn't know what kind of ability those invisible fluctuations were, but even his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords were completely unable to withstand it. Xianxia and her companions' faces paled again upon seeing this. They'd only opened up a little bit of distance between themselves and the giant moth at this point, so if it were to let loose its roars again, they would still be in a dire situation. However, Han Li remained completely unflustered at the sight of his flying swords being destroyed. Instead, he harumphed coldly and made a rapid series of hand seals before pointing a finger toward the distance. An astonishing scene then ensued. The countless azure flying sword fragments suddenly began to emit a loud buzzing sound while revolving around the massive moth. The fragments then joined together to form 72 azure flying swords again, and the two women were struck by a sense of déjà vu as they witnessed those swords slicing the giant moth into countless pieces once again. Han Li had naturally just unleashed his flying sword's void form ability, and the two women were truly flabbergasted. However, they quickly came to their senses and flew even faster over to Han Li before stopping right beside him. "Thank you for saving our lives, Senior. However, this monster is too powerful. We should run away while we still can," Xianxia said in an urgent voice. "You two can do as you please. I'm rather interested in this thing, so I want to see if I can kill it," Han Li replied in a calm manner. "Senior, we don't know where this beast came from, but it's extraordinarily powerful. Even Layman's silver shark suffered a terrible death at its hands. I think it's best to retreat first and work out a strategy before returning to try and hunt it down." The woman in black was clearly also of the opinion that a temporary retreat was the best option. Even though Han Li just displayed the abilities of his powerful flying swords, the two women still didn't think that he'd actually be able to defeat the monstrous moth. "Rest assured, you two, even if I can't defeat it, it'll be no problem for me to ensure self-preservation." Han Li shook his head with a faint smile. At this moment, grey light flashed in the distance, and the giant moth's body regenerated back to its original form again. However, the monster had flown into a thunderous rage, having been killed twice in quick succession, and it began to roar and flap its wings with even greater ferocity. Earth-shattering booms akin to loud thunderclaps rang out as a series of ripples radiated from the moth's body, proliferating in all directions in a frenzy. All of the flying swords exploded into even smaller pieces than before. However, the massive moth had learned its lesson from last time, and it continued to flap its wings violently without any respite. The moth was being kept at bay by the flying swords, so it wasn't able to approach Han Li, but its roars immediately made Xianxia and her companion's skin turn a deep shade of red again, as if their blood were about to escape from their bodies. In contrast, Han Li merely furrowed his brows and activated his provenance true devil arts to a slightly greater extent, thereby allowing him to ward off those negative effects. He then caught sight of the two women's dire conditions, and his hand shot forth like lightning as he thrust his palm toward them. Golden light flashed from his hand, and two golden pillars of light disappeared into their bodies in a flash. The two women immediately felt the churning blood within their bodies settle down to a great extent, and their flushed skin also reverted back to a more normal complexion. Both of them immediately heaved a collective sigh of relief before thanking Han Li for his assistance. This beast's roars are quite peculiar and can affect quite a vast area, so you two should get out of here for now, Han Li said as he waved a dismissive hand. He could see that the space within an area with a radius of over 10,000 feet around the giant moth was twisting and warping incessantly, making it feel as if he were appraising a massive illusion. Han Li wondered whether this was a result of the monster's roars or the invisible ripples emanating from its flapping wings. The two women were already petrified of the monster's devastating roars, so they already intended to flee the scene. They attempted to persuade Han Li to leave with them one last time, only to met by a refusal again. As such, they could only extend respectful parting curtsies before flying away as two streaks of light again. They fled for close to 100 kilometers, all the way until they reached the sea outside of the ice island's borders. Only there did the monstrous moth's roars completely fade. The two women stopped in midair before turning around to look behind them with lingering fear in their eyes. The woman in black took a moment to compose herself before asking, "Sister Qing, is that the Mr. Han you were talking about last time?" "Indeed. Mr. Han possesses the same cultivation base as Layman Silver Shark, but he appears to be far more powerful," Xianxia replied with a nod. "No matter how powerful he is, there's no way that he could be a match for that monster. Even Layman Silver Shark and his Silverlight Shark Spirit Beast working together could only last a few exchanges before they were killed by that thing. That monster's lower serpentine head is even more fearsome than its upper head. Senior Han's decision to engage it in battle really is quite unwise," the woman in black sighed. "That may not necessarily be the case. It appears that Mr. Han can remain completely unscathed in the face of the moth's roars, so he must have some kind of powerful protective ability. Also, the fact that he's so confident indicates that he'll at least be able to get away from that thing even if he can't defeat it. Let's wait here for now for the outcome of the battle. In the worst-case scenario, we'll just have to gather all of the upper beings among the races here to set up a few powerful formations to combat this beast." Xianxia was quite confident in Han Li's abilities, and she was already thinking ahead into the future. In the face of such a powerful monster, we can only rely on the power of spell formations. Otherwise, no matter how many people we gather, all of them will simply fall to those accursed roars. Thankfully, this thing appeared here quite early. Otherwise, in a month from now, all of the members of the hunting party will be gathering here, and even more fellow Taoists would perish, the woman in black said with a wry smile. "That's true. I wonder where this beast came from. It doesn't appear to be a sea beast," Xianxia murmured to herself with a set of furrowed brows. A hint of confusion also flashed past her companion's face, and she naturally didn't have the answer to that question, either. After the two women departed, Han Li's flying swords continued to be shattered into smaller and smaller pieces by the invisible power unleashed by the moth's wings. However, Han Li merely looked on with a cold smile on his face. This monster was at the late spatial tempering stage, and its abilities appeared to be quite powerful as well, but he certainly wasn't going to be fearful of it. After all, he was a simultaneous cultivator who had cultivated to the second part of the Provenance True Devil Arts, and he possessed several insanely powerful abilities. Thus, he immediately made a hand seal, and brilliant golden light emanated from his body as a golden halo appeared above his head. Within the halo, a projection with 3 heads and 6 arms gradually surfaced, and each of its 6 hands was making a different hand seal. Han Li let loose a low cry, and the golden projection waved all 6 of its arms toward the giant moth in unison. A string of dull thumps rang out, and 6 pillars of golden light that were as thick as large bowls shot forth from the projection's palms. The pillars of light pierced through the warped space up ahead, and was just about to strike the massive moth's body when a peculiar turn of events abruptly unfolded. The moth's gargantuan body suddenly blurred, and the 6 pillars of golden light were diverted away from their original paths, thereby glancing past the moth without hitting their target. Han Li faltered upon seeing this, but he then immediately reached out with an inky black hand before gently thrust it toward the giant moth up ahead. A vast expanse of grey light immediately erupted from his fingertips, forming a grey light barrier that hurtled toward the giant beast in a frenzy. The divine essence-fused light continued to expand drastically as it surged through the air, and it quickly encompassed virtually the entire sky. Such a large-scale attack was quite alarming even to the monstrous moth, and its green eyes flashed as it directed all of the invisible fluctuations from its wings toward the oncoming grey light. The grey light and invisible ripples clashed with a resounding boom akin to that of a thunderclap, and they seemed to be evenly matched as their clash resulted in a complete stalemate. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and the 5 fingers on his inky black hand suddenly curled inward slightly. All of a sudden, a black shadow appeared within the grey light, following which a small black mountain appeared, seemingly out of thin air. The small mountain then expanded at an alarming rate, reaching over 10,000 feet in size in just a few flashes. It was none other than the divine essence-fused mountain. The giant moth faltered initially upon seeing this mountain, but it then immediately let loose a thunderous roar. The invisible ripples hurtling through the air suddenly converged, forming a semi-transparent pillar of light that was visible to the naked eye, which then sped directly toward the underside of the massive mountain. These invisible ripples had been able to pulverize Han Li's flying swords, so it wasn't difficult to imagine their destructive power when condensed into a single pillar of light. Prior to fusing with those strange stone blocks, the divine essence-fused mountain may not have been able to withstand this pillar of light. However, ever since those stone blocks had been melted into it, the mountain had become resolute to an incredible degree. Grey light flashed from the underside of the mountain, and the pillar of light struck it amid a resounding boom. However, the pillar of light was quickly vanquished, but it had been unable to leave so much as a single scratch on the underside of the mountain. The giant moth was stunned to see this, and it was almost unable to believe its eyes. In contrast, Han Li remained completely expressionless as if he'd anticipated this in advance. He quickly made a hand seal, and the mountain came crashing down with devastating might. The massive moth was still conjuring up invisible ripples with its wings, but those ripples were swept aside with ease by the divine essence-fused mountain's enormous weight and power. Just as the black mountain was about to crush the massive moth into mincemeat, its lion head suddenly blurred before transforming into the giant serpentine head that had its eyes closed. The green serpentine head then abruptly opened its eyes to reveal a pair of shimmering golden pupils. It wore a frosty look on its face as it raised its head to appraise the oncoming black mountain. An eerie hissing sound escaped its mouth, and as it continued to flap its wings, puffs of grey powder suddenly began to permeate through the air, completely enshrouding and concealing the monster's body within. It seemed to be preparing to unleash some kind of powerful ability. A cold look appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and he abruptly made a hand seal, following which the black mountain accelerated in its descent, sinking into the grey powder in the blink of an eye.